Since its foundation in 1913, Waldzug has been committed to building a sustainable future through the manufacturing of long-lasting kitchen and textile care appliances and responsible carbon-neutral production. It means the Swiss firm is well placed to tackle the topic of timelessness in design. And that's exactly what it will do across 3 special episodes of Monocle on Design. Recorded at Milan Design Week, the final episode airs on Wednesday, 13th of June. We'll hear from designers including Jay Oscarby, Simone Farasin and Tosi Oshinowo.
Where you're contributing towards the urban environment, it's really, really important to create architecture that stands out but also recedes gently. It has to have a level of balance.
So tune in for some essential discussion on ensuring quality and longevity are imbued in our homes and workplace with Waldzug.
This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise.
And I'm Maylee Evans.
On today's programme, it's a London Festival of Architecture special.
We meet some of the participants hosting events, walks, exhibitions and open studios across the metropolis.
All that coming up on Monocle on Design.
Hello and welcome to today's programme, and as you might be able to tell, we're out of the studio. We are in East London at the London School of Architecture's Dalston Pavilion, which is right next to the school's new home. Nick, can you paint a picture for listeners? What have we got here?
We're sitting at a desk in an A-frame pavilion in a car park opposite the London School of Architecture, this amazing A-frame pavilion. But the reason I highlighted desk was because we're surrounded by students doing a host of different research projects, part of a program that's run through the London School of Architecture. It's their campaign to engage with local youth. It takes place before and after the festival, but it's also, they're here, they're present, they're part of the festival. I think that's important. But the pavilion is an outdoor exhibition space that doubles as a classroom and will host workshops for young people from a host of other organisations too. So there's the local Rio Cinema, there's the Hackney School of Food, and the Royal Institute of British Architects Youth Forum, who will all be involved at events in this pavilion in a car park in East London.
And it's also worth flagging that some of the students here are reimagining the car park space that we're currently in, which links quite nicely to the wider festival's theme, which is reimagine. What do you think of if I say reimagine, Nick?
I think it's just a kind of a gentle nudge to start to think about, you know, what our cities, what our public spaces, what our architecture, what our buildings could be. And that's what I like about it. It's a very simple prompt, but it could have this wide-ranging, huge impact. Reimagining can be a small thing, but it can also be very ambitious, very future-focused. That's the beauty of it. That's the power of this selection of the word reimagine, because you can apply it in so many different contexts, from a car park to assembly spaces across the city, which we'll hear from later in the show. I think the open-endedness and the ambition of it is what I really, really like about the theme.
Now we're outside here in this lovely sort of outdoor classroom of sorts. But Nick, you've been traipsing around the city. I understand that you've met up with the team at Urban Radicals. You've got a couple of different structures. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Urban Radicals are this amazing London-based design studio who are addressing or responding to a brief that was put out by the London Festival of Architecture and the City of London, which is also known as the Square Mile. It's literally the Square Mile, the financial heart, where all the important institutions are based in the city. And they put forward this brief to think about and reimagine the Square Mile. And Urban Radicals challenge this notion that civic buildings in this part of the city are often closed off, and they thought, you know, what happens if we create a place that encourages public participation and discussion, from small personal moments to large gatherings. So they installed 4 installations ranging in scale, from a single person kind of moment called the Speaker's Plinth to the Voicing Pod, which is a kind of 2-person space for intimate conversations. Then they have the Round Table, which is a 12-person table for shared meals and discussions. And then finally the Public Assembly, which is this sort of auditorium space that can host 40 people. So to find out a little bit more about it, I walked between 2 of these spaces with Ira Savidi and Narcios Vanavis in London Square Mile. We visited their 40-person Public Assembly installation first, and then the 12-person Round Table.
I think when you look at cities like Barcelona or Berlin and then you compare them to London, I think London is very controlled, and there's kind of the beautiful aspects of that. It's very green, it's very tidy, it's very clean. But when we're looking at the typologies of the parliament, there's a power and there's a performability that comes and arises from each typology of each city or of each country. And I think that's really interesting, whether it's in opposition, whether there's people coming together, looking at one person, where it's one person in a kind of a classroom typology. And I do feel it relates a lot to how that kind of culture and the politics that play and affect public space come into play. So in terms of how these spaces are used, we try to play on that a bit. So, for example, with the assembly that we're sitting right now, it's kind of mimicking the two benches opposing, which I feel is interesting. Or when you're sitting at a round table, even if it's for an informal kind of lunch, you're just having a sandwich, you're already being part of a 4-meter table where it becomes performative. You are facing another person, and that is already becoming something, even if it's not organized. So we hope beyond our events that people might have ideas, or it might strike this kind of sense of gathering and of people deciding. We had a student coming by the other day asking us what this is for, and we said, it's for people coming together, you decide. And the guy, he was a student here at the Morgan Library, he said, oh my God, that's perfect. And I said, yes, please do go on the LFA and submit your event, and we'd really support. And he said, you know what, I have 2 girlfriends, and I have to marry one, and I have to have this conversation with my mother and my relatives. Can I book this space to bring all my family here and interview? And we were just kind of just staring at him, and we were saying, yes. But he was being completely serious, but we're also thinking, if it's also for the city, and if you want to bring, maybe.
I mean, to be honest, that sounds like it would make amazing viewing. I'm a big reality television fan, and I think we should get some cameras here for that as well. This is something that's curious. I mean, the form that you've chosen here, like you said, it's maybe inspired, or it is inspired by the Parliament. You've got moments of opposition. I mean, how does this sort of public space installation differ from what we typically have? And I'm looking at everything else that's around us here, and it's just benches facing away, singular. I mean, is that something that you wanted to address, to provide something different, to provide some public realm infrastructure that was out of the ordinary?
Always the notion of fun. We're the people who designed the project, but we feel like we always look for an element of play, fun, joy, like something unexpected. So the canopy maybe is inspired by those tiramisu like biscuits, things that like also blend a little bit with the idea of like the street, which is, for example, the legs of this space we kind of painted. There's this zebra like black and white effect, for example, which is something you see around the city as like scaffolding or barriers. So we basically try to bring in the language of the street in our design. So I don't think we consider it as like a final kind of product or a polished product, even though it might look like one, but it's kind of a hybrid of different things that we try to kit bash together whilst we're designing it. This leads into something which is kind of unexpected, hopefully.
I'm curious as well. So we're in the space for a larger group. I think it's also fascinating that you've sort of identified that we also need moments for smaller gatherings, whether that's one person on a plinth or 2 people in a podcast booth or a group of 12 people around a table. But they're also scattered across. Do you think, I think it might be worthwhile having a walk over to see the 12-person table. Should we walk and talk?
Can you see the wacky banana leaves?
Yeah.
Just over there? That's our table. We've been walking for 10-15 minutes.
Yes.
The whole walk. It's been really interesting, but how many places of community gathering have we spotted?
Very, very few, and it does feel like you've kind of staged this, because as we're pulling up, there are a couple of different groups all using your installation, sitting down, talking to each other. We're kind of approaching this. It's a round table with benches and then plants, like that banana plant you just referenced, plants coming up through it. Tell me a little bit about the design. I mean, I know, assemblies, it's informed by the Parliament. What's the link we've got here, other than obviously providing a place for people to come together?
In our pitch, we were doing the research and we came across the Parliament Oak, where the first kind of dialogues and discussions happened here. So we tried to reference that, the idea of conversing around the tree. It has a power in itself, like in almost all cultures, I guess, but also it has this kind of informality that it feels a little bit more horizontal rather than, the kind of very institutional way of assembly and political discussions which happen in buildings which are, they're institutions, they're security kind of driven, and they don't really come across as horizontal anymore.
They inspire us to kind of come together in a very different way. And in every one of these platforms, we've tried to introduce that tree, whether it's with the plinths wrapping around trees, these tiny trees that exist on Vine Street, but we tried to kind of bring them up and wrap around them. And where we were just sitting before, there's a little allotment, kind of mini garden in the middle. And in our podcast, on the walls of the podcast, there's an archive of the seats and the stories that they hold that hopefully link all the platforms together.
Ira Savidi and Narcios Varnavas, co-founders of Urban Radicals. Now, Meili, we're jumping from me going on a walk to you going on a walk. So tell us a little bit about the stroll you had around London as part of the London Festival of Architecture as well.
Yes, so there was one event on the lineup that did pique my interest, and that was the Tin Can Headphone Group Walk. This started at Waterloo Station underneath the clock and finished at Blackfriars Station. It was actually a route that the artist Catherine Smith used to do at lunchtimes during a job many, many moons ago. And it was at a time where they felt quite disconnected, and it was a walk that really grounded them and connected them to the space and to themselves. And so on this walk, you're given a pair of industrial tin cans which have been fashioned into a set of headphones. So they're not the most subtle outfit choice. And once you've got these headphones on, you're led through a series of tasks. And the idea is that it helps you reflect on what public space is like, who's welcome, who isn't, how can we engage with the existing world, maybe in a different way, reflect on our own relationships to the spaces around us, the ones that we're familiar with. So I caught up with the artist to find out a little bit more about how this project came to be.
My name is Catherine Smith. I'm a performance artist and writer working with embodiment and dissociation. The Tin Can Headphone Group Walks are the most recent part of an ongoing project for the last 5 years, where I'm looking at how to create embodied connection to myself, to others, and to the spaces around us. I started working with tin cans in my practice when I was exploring using different specific materials with sonic or haptic qualities as a way to be present in my own body, to connect to myself, and at the same time to connect outwards to other people and the spaces around us. Tin cans are quite special because they're so responsive sonically. They pick up tiny differences of texture, bumps on the floor, amplifying my movement too in sound. So it was a very slow process of sonic awareness through the tin cans, which made me think a lot about where my body starts and ends in space. For a long time, I've worked with groups in many different settings. The tin cans started to enter these settings, not the hospital so much due to health and safety concerns, but definitely into the schools and community spaces. This everyday object they could relate to already. I wasn't bringing something into the space that wasn't part of their everyday. So the work became more a collective investigation into tin cans and how we connect collectively using these sonic, haptic, responsive objects. I'm interested in the relationship people have to their everyday spaces they often don't notice. In schools, I've spent a lot of time in corridors, car parks, stairwells, lifts, and with university students, we've spent time near or on their campuses. And then the public Tin Can Headphone Group walks have taken place in many different public spaces so far, each according to the relationships to space of the groups. In these spaces, I'm interested in the structures that are present that strongly impact embodied experience. Space contains rules around how to move physically, what is allowed, what isn't allowed, which bodies are welcomed into the space and which are not. often within embedded dissociative systems of hierarchy and power. Spaces contain histories, and particularly in the centre of London, histories of empire and colonialism. The spaces we are in strongly affect how present or not we are, depending on our own embodied experience. I was interested in noticing where in public space I was dissociated and where I could be present. When working with groups, when entering into a group embodied connection, thinking and feeling through all the different barriers to access that are present in public spaces, and whether we can be aware of these and find embodied connection with each other in often inaccessible and hostile spaces. For example, how a wheelchair user might navigate a gap that is far too narrow. We were aware in Liverpool Street Station how heavily policed the station was, and that very quickly our group was being scrutinised by security, and then that's the relationship of different experiences of embodiment with a system that is incredibly violent. Feedback I've got a lot is that through the work people experience an everyday space in a different way. It's perhaps in a slower way, in a more concentrated way. It's a huge privilege to slow down and spend a lot of concentrated time on the stairs, for example, or in a lift, in a corridor, in a station. Slowing down isn't an option for most people at the moment, and it really feels like a radical ask within the society. When we have this space of slowness, I've had feedback it's really impactful, and that the next time they walk past the space or through it, that it will have changed for them because of the memory of the attention we put on it together. Each time I do the walks, I learn something new, whether it's something about the history of the space or the embodied experience of someone in the group. I was with a group in Morden Library, and I learnt so many things. The distance between tables, the lighting, and how sound bounced off the wall in the library. There's always something new that I haven't understood. It just feels like an ongoing deepening into my experience of space, the interpersonal space in the group, and also more fixed things around us.
So that was Catherine Smith there. And whilst you were listening to that, I actually gave Nick one of the prompts that participants on that walk are given to do, which is to count the number of windows in a building, which sounds like a simple task. But Nick, how did you find that?
Maths isn't my strong point, and I actually realised I kind of needed to do that to really tackle this enormous mixed-use building that we're sitting opposite. Because initially I was going one by one, and I was like, that's not efficient. I want to try and get through this. I want to get the number of windows counted. And I realised there was a bit of a pattern to it, so then I started doing maths. It's like, well, each block has 16 windows, so 16 times 12, and then I very, very quickly got confused and my mind started to wander, and I was like, how interesting that it's so geometric, and I wouldn't have thought of it unless I was asked to count the windows. To be honest, it was almost like meditative, and it was making me really stop and soak in the built environment around me. I've walked past this building many times. I live right around the corner, and the number of times I've glossed past it, but stopping and counting the windows, how powerful.
Well, there we go. Well, whilst we both count some more windows, I think maybe it's time for a break.
Want to ease into your Saturdays and Sundays in top form? Then tune into Monocle Weekends, where we offer up smart discussion.
If they take the view that journalists make things up, then they will prefer to believe other people.
The latest from the front pages.
Neue Zürcher Zeitung am Sonntag is reporting that Switzerland's already set aside 200 million francs.
Magazine tips, plenty of authors.
That gives me the theatre where my characters will act.
And pointers for better evenings on your terrace.
Me, I open more than one bottle because it's easier than just to focus on one bottle.
Join me, Georgina Godwin.
Me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
Me, Emma Nelson, from London.
And from Zurich, me, Tyler Brûlé.
Tune in every weekend, right here on Monocle Radio.
Welcome back to Monocle on Design. This is a London Festival of Architecture special. Nick, we've been outside for a while. It's getting a bit brisk. Can we go indoors, please?
Mainly, Evans, we can go indoors. In fact, we are going indoors. It's not just a can, it's a will. And we're going to the studio of Morris & Company. They're an architecture and design practice based right near my home in East London. They've got this sensational shop front where they display their models and some of their work. It's a gallery-like space. So I've been meaning to find an excuse to go in. And the London Festival of Architecture provided that They're participating in the Studio Lates program, which takes place on the 13th of June. So you haven't missed it. I just gave myself a little sneak peek. But to find out what's taking place on Thursday this week, I dropped past their studio.
My name is Joe Morris. I am an architect by trade. And I am the founding director of a company called Morrison Company. We have been going, I think it's 20 years this October, so we're about to go into our third decade, and that's extraordinary. I can't quite believe it. We are 50, 60 people, amazing designers, urbanists, architects. We have a small outpost in Copenhagen trying to broaden as much as possible the sort of spectrum of our influence, not just architecture, but in terms of practice and lots of things that we represent. So we have outreach programs, exhibition spaces, we have launch events, a restaurant next door, cater for people. Of about 50 odd desks we've got upstairs, half of them are other parties. So we are now, with Edit next door, who's a restaurant, who's also sharing our space. I think we have 8 businesses, including ours, in this sort of new community, which we call the Home of Ideas. And the LFA is an opportunity really to explore and express and to really kind of demonstrate that architecture and design is an endeavour best done in company.
You hinted at the fact that we've got a bit of a shop front here as well. The reason we've ended up here talking today is I'd walked past your shop front so many times. To me, so many architecture studios are kind of tucked away, they're maybe hidden out of the way, they're in the city on top floors. Why have this gallery space? Why start a dialogue with the community?
In some ways, I've landed in a rather sort of fortuitous place where I've got business that sort of works. It's been going for 20 years, it's sort of established and it has its own systems in place. The whole idea of deshackling and revealing and removing the cynicism and expressing the humanity and the basic simpleness or the everyday of architecture is just people doing stuff. And I think by locking things away and being secretive and turning your back and getting on the first floor or in a tower away from the streets, it kind of builds that degree of separatism and elitism and that kind of corporate greed that I think people assume that architects are. And by and large, we're not. Actually, we are people that have a vested interest in creating genuine places for them as broad a reach of people as possible. We wanted to just be able to communicate that and reveal that to people so that in some ways people are more inclined to consider architects as being the good people rather than the bad.
Tell us a little bit about your relationships with, I guess, the people that come through the door. I know you work with some youth in the area. What sort of narratives or discussions are you having around architecture with them?
The list of the different types of events that we hold is quite broad. We have one-to-one sessions in terms of young people and portfolios and how to put a portfolio together through to, we had Beyond the Box here. That's motivated young people who don't understand architecture or actually don't understand the full workings of architecture, which you wouldn't, but gaining access to ARUP, HTA, Morrison Company, Beyond the Box, facilities, teaching, learning, a crit, and going through the cycle and actually building out the design that they came to the table with. All that's extraordinary, right the way through to teaching programs, to lectures, to launch events, you name it, and corporates as well. So this is genuinely seeing that there's potential here to bring an extraordinary mix of people from, blue ribbon corporate footsies right the way down to local kids in sort of yellow jackets that walk past.
We've got listeners across the globe. If they've got their own architecture practice, so let's say in Sydney, why should they copy this model? What do you get out of this as a designer? What lessons have you learned by opening up to the street?
I think it's a sense of value, sort of investment. It's a sense of belonging. It's being rooted, connecting with people. And I think you can't sort of put a value on that. Lots of people talk about social value and they're trying to work out what the calculation for that is and puts it in a little spreadsheet. That's not what we're interested in. I think it's hairs on end, heart beating a bit faster, passion, being in the space with people that you wouldn't ordinarily meet. That has to have value somewhere. We make connections. The fact that you're here, the fact that you passed us a couple of times proves that as an idea that it works.
And then I guess just finally, so we've got an event here on the 13th of June. Yeah. Why should people come down to the studio late here at Morrison Company?
The big thing here is trying not to be too much architecture, trying not to be too much Morrison Company. Although we've got big signs outside and they may go at some point. Once you get in here, it's not really a Morrison Company thing. We're almost not present at all. Actually, we're just hosting. And you'll see that it's everyone else who's going to be showcasing their work. We've got the Mass Collective, who are this incredible collection of photographers who are doing surveys with interested photographers, amateurs, and they've gone around the whole area, documented and mapped it, and they're going to be showcasing that, which is exciting. We've got games to play, understanding how carbon works, sustainability, workshops to take place. Clem Blakemore and her team are going to be, again, talking about kind of low-carbon architecture and so forth. A lot of things that you can learn. It's quite a diverse presentation. Again, it's not stiff. Lots of different things to look at, to play, and if you break something, no one's going to bat an eyelid.
My thanks to Joe Morris there. That was a studio visit to Morris & Company in East London. Those looking to join at their studio late can do so this Thursday, the 13th of June 2024. Full details can be found at the London Festival of Architecture website. And Maylee, finally, to round off the show, we've had installations, we've had studio visits. Let's go for a showcase.
We're trying to make a point that there's so many different things you can get involved in depending on what you fancy. Craft Community Connection is on show this week at the Crafts Council Gallery, and that's highlighting the work of the emerging architectural practice Studio SAR. Now, they work between the UK and India and draw on both context and cultures. Ananya Singhal, the managing partner of the studio, joined me at Midori House to discuss some of the projects featured in the exhibition and their ambitions for the future.
Craft Community Connection. It's exploring three really important elements of our practice, the way we operate. We're very lucky that Secure, which is the main business that I run with my brother, supports the entire cost of the architectural practice, and that enables us to choose work which is of either interesting social or interesting environmental value, and not focus so much on being able to make profit out of every single project. The work that we're doing right now is, for example, exploring how manufacturing facilities in India could be designed in a much better way. Now, unfortunately, what happens with most factory design is just sheds being put through. We've been able to explore how to cost-effectively make better buildings, both for the people working in it as well as for the environment. Most practices don't get an opportunity to look at those kind of projects because people don't want to spend money on architects. But hopefully we'll create a blueprint which enables other people to start looking. And we're seeing that in India now. There are people in the Confederation of Indian Industry, for example, who are like, how the hell do you manage to do this for this price? And so they're kind of getting interested. And maybe there is a wave of new manufacturing buildings, like the Victorian manufacturing buildings used to be, that are going to be just stunningly beautiful, great places to work, as well as a good legacy of buildings. So when India moves from manufacturing to other areas, those buildings can be reused, very much like we are reusing Victorian buildings in the UK. We owned that business for which we made the factory. And one of the many insights that we found was if you create a better workplace, people actually are more productive, they do better quality work, and also they don't leave you. Now, all of these things are actually big business benefits. And we were able to take all of that learning and say, right, if we created a factory which actually celebrated the act of making, the people who made things, by allowing natural light in for most of the working day, by creating large spaces so people don't feel claustrophobic, by making sure the temperature is controlled and is bright and airy and clear. And that allows the discipline to take place within the factory. But then when you move away from the factory production lines, can we create a place for people to socialize, for people to gather, for people to find friendships and relationships? Because those friendships and relationships are what keeps people working within the company. Therefore, the canteen with the recreation facilities and everything else became such a dominant factor of what we were doing. We as a company and as an architectural practice decided to spend and invest as much in creating the recreational spaces as we did creating the manufacturing spaces. Today, if we just look at attrition in our facility compared to facilities right next door, we're half everybody else. Our salaries are the same. The only thing that's different is working environment.
You're based between Somerset and Rajasthan, so what does that look like in practice for you? Is that a case of drawing from two different cultures, or what does it look like at the moment?
It's very much situation dependent. I grew up in India. I strongly identify with my Indian heritage. But then I was educated here in the UK. I spent a kind of 15 years of my life here in the UK. So I have both the cultures sitting within me. Therefore, as a practice, we are able to look at all problems through both lenses. The lens with which people in India or people in Asia look at problems, and the lens with which people in the West look at problems are very different, and sometimes the solutions are incredibly different. And it's really interesting to see how, when the practice combines and works together on problems, how the two different sides approach the same problem. And many of the times we get some really third solution, which is something that's a beautiful blend of the both. And I think that's when the practice works at its peak. Before the practice was formed, actually, Johnny, who's our creative lead and leads our UK office, and myself, we were working with another friend of ours on a extension of a house in Hampshire. This was a multi-generational family house. It had family needs, and it had needs of people living separately as well. We were able to look at how old homes in India deal with that situation and be able to come up with how can we translate that to a 500-year-old farmhouse in the middle of Hampshire. And we created a space which is actually incredibly usable, with the way the family room sits next to the kitchen and it sits next to the garden and kind of integrates everything. It was that combination of, right, we have all of this architectural heritage sitting here in the middle of Hampshire, and we have a cultural heritage which is sitting in India, and we can blend that together to create something which would be very unusual for a real estate agent to come across. But nonetheless, it works. That's the UK approach. In India, Third Space, which is a large cultural science activity center for learning and development of young people, that actually has, it's properly blended in terms of a understanding of how spaces are structured, how people flow through the building. There's a lot of learning that we picked up from museums, cultural centers here in the UK, and we were able to put that in India, because this kind of building doesn't really exist very much in India. They're just starting to come up. So this is very much a pioneer. And at the same time, we needed to understand, right, the way Indians come to these buildings is very different. And therefore, what do we need to offer them? And how do we make sure that we take the best of what the UK Science and Art Museum offers and the best of what the Indian culture offers? And we actually ended up with this huge atrium space, which is open-air atrium space, which is the Bowery, which has been an incredibly successful space, far more than any of us were expecting it to be. You go there Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it's buzzing with people. And it's because people in India just like informal hanging out. And because it's hot or it's raining, you can't really do it outside. And therefore, this kind of almost veranda interstitial space is actually fantastic for people to hang out. And just by putting a shop and a cafe and some other activities around it, it's activated the space in a way which definitely beats my expectations. There are two different directions for the practice in the two different countries. I think in the UK, we are really looking forward to finding projects where people can't afford architects. Small businesses who want to set up their own place but don't know how to, can't afford architects. And it's our job to make the building cost effective and make our fees come out of that. And at the same time, everyone's talking about a housing crisis. There's a real opportunity here for us to work on that. Again, because our costs are paid for, we can do some really interesting work, which many other practices maybe can't. In India, I would say we're already setting up to figure out how we can educate the city of Udaipur and the people of Udaipur about how cities develop, the lessons learned from the West. The local government out there wanted to create a lot of elevated freeways through the city. And so we started to do work to explain to people, right, this is how the West went towards elevated freeways, and now they're all trying to get rid of them. So how about we not make that mistake, and how about we invest this money in a different fashion? This is a complicated job because you're speaking to government, you're speaking to NGOs, you're speaking to the public, and you're speaking to architectural town planning professionals, and you're tacking when they're going in the other direction. But for me, long-term ambition is relatively small. I just want to make Udaipur a great city. And hopefully people will be able to learn from that and take that learning elsewhere in India and in other global south cities.
Ananya Singhal, Managing Partner at Studio SAR.
And the exhibition, Craft Community Connection, is on until Saturday the 15th of June at Crafts Council Gallery. I want to ask you a question. You've seen a lot. You've experienced a lot in this life, but also for the London Festival of Architecture. I mean, for people who can't be here at this event, you know, if I'm a listener in Sydney, if I'm a listener in Singapore, if I'm a listener in Sao Paulo, why should I care about what's taking place here? What lessons could, you know, I perhaps learn or take back to my home city without actually even coming to London?
I think a lot of these citywide festivals, you use them as a starting point, and it's not about attending as many different events or studio lates as you can and seeing everything. It's about finding what interests you in a lineup, and you can kind of use that as a launchpad to find out more about their practice, and you can use that to inform your own. Often we see lots of festivals happening all over the world, and there's no way we can go to all of them, but it gives you a starting point, a frame of reference to go forth and do more research, I guess.
I think using the festival as a curator of sorts, people have been selected because they're doing work that's particularly important or particularly interesting, or maybe there's some potential in it. For me, it's just a reminder to look at where I am sure this is taking place in London, right around the corner from my house. There's plenty going on, but you know, if I'm somewhere else in the world, maybe it's just a reminder to take a look at the windows, have a look at what trees are around you, where's a vacant car park that might have the potential to be reimagined. So looking at what's taking place somewhere else or hearing about it and then seeing, well, how could I apply that to my own domain?
Well, on that note, that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays.
And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me, Maylee Evans.
I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.